In this video, we'll answer the question, why does Starship keep exploding? And more importantly, why is that a good thing? It seems like every time SpaceX tries to launch their Starship rocket, something goes wrong and the rocket explodes. People have been saying the same thing over and over again. SpaceX can't seem to get their Starship rocket to work properly. Every time they fire the engines or try to launch the thing, it blows up. Well, let me tell you, that couldn't be further from the truth. In fact, the exact opposite is true. SpaceX is actually doing exactly what they should be doing with Starship, so stick around because in this video, we're going to explain exactly why. But first, for those who don't know, my name is Author. I am a journalist and editor at a large website. And on this channel, we do our best to help you understand what's going on in the world of spaceflight. So, there's no easy way to say this, but Starship keeps exploding. Well, not really. The booster has exploded during testing. The spaceship has exploded during testing. And then during the first integrated flight test, both stages exploded. To make matters worse, those explosions weren't small. We've seen lots of rockets explode during testing and launches, but rarely do they explode so spectacularly. So given that Starship is one of the most watched rockets ever made, it shouldn't come as a surprise that many of these tests have been recorded from different angles, and some of them have even been captured in 360 degrees, while others have been viewed by people lucky enough to be standing nearby. And if you've seen even just a few of these videos, then it might seem like the engineers at SpaceX are completely incompetent. I mean, how can one company make so many mistakes? Well, let's start out by talking about the recent Starship explosion that happened during the booster's first attempt at a static fire test. This test took place on March 2, 2023. And unlike other recent booster static fires, this test was meant to simulate a real launch. And SpaceX engineers wanted to see how the vehicle would perform when going through all the different phases of flight. Like during this test, the booster was loaded with propellant and then went through all the same steps that it would right before launch. Then, when everything was ready, the Raptor engines were ignited and shot the rocket straight into the air. But sadly, the rocket only got about 20 feet off the ground before it began to violently shake. After about 5 seconds of terror, the shaking became more intense and the whole vehicle was engulfed in flames. Within seconds, the entire stack was blown apart by a force so strong that it could be heard almost 30 miles away. Now, if you're like anyone else, then you might be wondering, why did SpaceX do this? Why didn't they just cancel the launch when they saw that things were going wrong? And here's where things become a little confusing. Because while it may seem like SpaceX just decided to go ahead with the launch despite seeing problems, that couldn't be further from the truth. You see, when watching live footage of the test, it may have looked like nothing was happening until suddenly the rocket lifts off. But what you didn't see was the hours of work that the SpaceX team spent trying to fix different problems that arose during pre-launch. For example, right before the test, engineers noticed that some of the sensors in the rocket were reading abnormally high temperatures. Now, in most rockets, this wouldn't be a big deal because such systems have fail-safes built in. But Starship is still a relatively new rocket, and many of its systems haven't been thoroughly tested yet, so the engineers were unsure if they should continue with the launch or not. Ultimately, they decided to proceed with caution, and many of the systems were disabled to reduce the chances of an explosion. For example, the gas generators, which are responsible for starting the rocket's engines, were taken offline and replaced with auxiliary power units. These APUs use batteries to start the engines without the need for pressurized gas. This change alone made the launch much more likely to fail. But SpaceX still decided to push forward. As it turned out, this was probably the right choice. By proceeding with the test, the SpaceX team gained tons of valuable data that will help them improve their rocket's reliability. After all, nobody at SpaceX wants their rocket to explode, especially not during a launch. So, what does this all mean? Well, simply put, this means that SpaceX is doing exactly what they should be doing with Starship. Remember, Starship is a completely new rocket, which makes it the perfect candidate for testing new technologies. In fact, NASA has been working on similar tests for years now with their space launch system. For example, before launching Artemis 1, NASA conducted numerous tests on the SSL rocket. And guess what? Many of them ended in explosions. When something explodes during testing, engineers can take the pieces and study them to figure out why the system failed. They can look at the materials and see if anything changed unexpectedly or if any of the parts were faulty. Often, engineers can find the cause of failure and improve upon the design, making sure that it never happens again. If an explosion occurs during an actual launch, however, then the parts are blown to smithereens and finding the cause of failure becomes almost impossible. Now, I'm not saying that SpaceX isn't taking precautions. Of course, before each test, the SpaceX team inspects every piece of hardware to ensure that everything is working properly. However, in the case of the recent booster explosion, it appears that the inspection missed a valve that was leaking supercold liquid methane. It wasn't supposed to leak at all, but somehow it slipped past the quality control. Luckily, the booster was destroyed during a test, which means that the data from the test can be used to determine the root cause of the problem and fix it. If the explosion had happened during a real launch, then SpaceX would have to go back and inspect the entire booster again, wasting valuable time and resources. But unfortunately, this isn't the end of the story, because even though SpaceX has been conducting tests for months now, they still haven't managed to light all the engines at once. So you might be wondering, why don't they just test the engines one at a time instead of testing them all together? That way they can pinpoint the exact engine that's causing the failure. And this is actually a great idea. But unfortunately, it doesn't always work out that way. You see, when testing complex systems, engineers often encounter unexpected results. For example, lighting up just 3 engines might seem like a good idea, but the vibrations caused by those engines could damage the vehicle or even cause another engine to explode. And when dealing with a complex system like a rocket, figuring out the source of the problem can be extremely difficult. It's like trying to find a leak in a faulty water pipe. If the pipe is old and corroded, then it could be hard to figure out exactly where the leak is coming from. Plus, if a single engine fails, then the surrounding engines could be affected too. Testing them individually doesn't allow engineers to study these interactions, which makes it harder to figure out what's going on. The solution is to test the entire system at once. That way, SpaceX engineers can study how the different parts interact and figure out what's causing the explosions. For example, during the recent test, the booster was destroyed by a force so powerful that it blew the whole thing apart. This wouldn't have happened if all the engines had worked properly. So now SpaceX knows that they need to improve their engine management system. This is exactly how engineering works. It's a process of trial and error. When something goes wrong, engineers try to figure out why and then adjust the design accordingly. That way, the next time they test the rocket, they'll be one step closer to success. Now, I'm not saying that SpaceX is deliberately trying to blow up their rockets. In fact, I'm saying the exact opposite. The reason why Starship keeps exploding is because SpaceX is trying to learn as much as possible about their rocket. They want to find all the weak points and then improve them before launching real payloads. For example, the recent booster explosion happened because of a faulty valve. Had the explosion happened during a real launch, then the entire booster would have been destroyed. But because it happened during testing, SpaceX can now focus on improving that particular system. Now, I know that some people might think that SpaceX is wasting their money by blowing up their rockets, but that's not true either. Every explosion gives the engineers valuable data that can be used to improve the design. And the cost of fixing a rocket is nowhere near as expensive as the cost of building a rocket in the first place. Take the SSL, for example. During testing, the core stage exploded multiple times, but each explosion gave NASA valuable data that helped them improve the rocket. Ultimately, the SSL was successfully launched and is now on its way to the moon. So the next time you hear about a SpaceX rocket exploding, don't be sad. Instead, be happy knowing that the engineers are one step closer to solving the problem. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe.